Hello everyone, I'm Colin Kinnett, and I haven't done any table saw hacks for quite a while now, so that's what I'm going to do today. But before I do that, I want to give a shout out to Mark on the continent of Antarctica. Recently commented on one of my videos. He's stationed at Peninsula Palmer Base Station, so great to hear from you, Mark. I don't get that many comments from people from Antarctica, so anyway, let's get on with our table saw hacks today. Not long ago, I had a question from Ken, and he was cutting some 1/8 plywood, and it was catching underneath the fence on his table saw. And I've had the same problem. This table saw is a little bit better, but even when I'm cutting very thin plexiglass, or if I'm cutting veneers or something like that, it slides underneath. There's two ways to fix that. Now, there has to be a gap on a fence, and that's so that it moves smoothly across the table and doesn't get caught in the miter slot. But the really quick fix to that, get yourself just an ordinary board that's straight and flat on the bottom, and now you can just take a moment and clamp that on there front and back, and now you've got a nice tight fence that's equal to the fence that you've got, and you can still move that back and forth, at least to some degree. It may catch on your miter slot if you're not careful, but it's only there, it's a temporary fence. Now, the other thing you could do, and I've shown you this before, is I have this plastic, I use this plastic fence here, and you can get these special little clamps here. I can show you what they look like. They're like that. You drill a hole and it just sits in there like that. And now it's a sacrificial fence. It's normally used for cutting dados, and this is a fairly new one, and I haven't cut any dados with it yet, but usually there would be some arcs in there where it would be over where the blade would have cut into, so that I don't cut into my fence. But you can use the same thing. See how it's nice and tight to the bottom there? You could use the same thing for doing this as well, for making sure that you can see it nice and tight to the top of the table saw. Now, here was another question that I had a little while ago. I think it was from Jay, and that was just an initial. He's using plywood and putting on a fairly thick strip on here to sort of face the plywood. And I just did this quickly so I could demonstrate to you. You could cut this off with a router with a flush trim bit, and the problem with that is sometimes it chips it and it can damage it, and you end up having to redo that. I've had that happen to me the odd time. The other thing that you can do is what I'm going to show you. It's another way, and it's a surefire way that works well. And what you need to do is you would use this fence, and what I'm going to do, I've got some screws, and I'm just going to put a couple of screws in, and they're going to be stoppers along the bottom. Now, these need to be right up against the fence. See how that's going to keep the fence lifted. It's going to elevate it a little bit, and that's exactly what I want. Now what I want to do is lift that table saw blade, and I want to lift it so that it's just going to be even. And now what I can do is take this wood, and when I run that along, it's going to be running even with the along the inside here, but that blade is going to cut that strip right off. And there you can see just what that edge looks like. Nice clean job. Now, the other thing that can happen with your table saw over time, sometimes it can come out of alignment, or more often, a blade can get bent because wood inadvertently gets jammed in it, and that can actually bend some blades. The way to check that is to make a little jig like this. Pretty simple little jig. It's got a miter blank in the bottom, and it's just some scrap 3/4 inch plywood. You need to make this so that it doesn't move around. It needs to be nice and snug in there, whatever you need to do to make that nice and snug in there. And all I have here is some ready rod, and you can see that I have a T-nut, and I actually screwed that in there. There's a couple of cap screws there that are holding that in, and the whole thing is nice and snug. Now there's two things that you can measure. First of all, the alignment of the blade. Sorry, before you do that, you need to make sure that your blade is absolutely vertical. Then you take and mark one blade, and you can see that I've marked that one blade there, and you adjust your ready rod so that it's just barely touching the steel, not the carbide, the steel just behind that tooth that you marked. And then when you move that tooth to the other side, when you move your jig over there, that should be just exactly the same position that it was over here. And if it is, that means your table saw is in perfect alignment. The other thing that you can check is to see if your blade is actually warped, and that does happen. And the way you do that, again, you'll have to mark one tooth, and now you're going to check either every tooth or every other tooth, and again mark them and check every other tooth, and you're looking at the steel just behind the carbide, and on every tooth it wants to be in exactly the same position. And you'll notice very quickly where there's an area where you can see that it's actually quite warped. It's bent quite a ways from your marking. A couple things that you can do to help make sure you get good results on your table saw. Not long ago, I needed a feather board for some wood that I was cutting on my table saw here, and I've seen pictures of people using these springs. This is a hinge with a spring in it. It's like a gate hinge. And I've never really given them too much thought, but I needed something quickly. I didn't have a feather board, so I decided I would take a minute and make one of these up. And I'm astounded how well it worked. Now, you've seen me use these magnetic switches before. Mine are an old version that have the black top on them, but when you turn that switch on the bottom, it magnetizes, and you can't pull those things off. Whenever you're using a feather board on a table saw, the feather board wants to be behind the blade. So in this case, I'm going to take the wood out. I'm going to set this up here and here, and you can see that it's not even touching the blade. And now when I run that through, what's happening is it's forcing my wood against the fence here, and now I can run that wood through. So let's do that. Now the other thing that happens with table saws, from time to time fences can get out of alignment, and everything on table saws need to align with the miter slots. So the blades need to be parallel with the miter slots, and the fence needs to be parallel with the miter slots. In fact, sort of the preferred setting for fences is that they're absolutely in line at the beginning of the miter slot. At the end, they're sort of that way by about 2 or 3 thicknesses of a piece of paper, so sort of 1/1000th of an inch, and that's so that when the wood comes through that it's not going to bind. You never want the fence going this way, because then it's going to bind with the blade. Now look, here's a really easy way. Sometimes it's hard to tell because there's a gap. We've talked about the gap underneath here. Sort of aligning your board, and you can put a board in there, but then it's really hard to see because this is where most of your wood is getting cut down here, but you can only see up here, so it's hard to tell. So look, here's what I've done. I have a miter slot. In this case, I'm just using a piece of hardwood, ran it through the saw, and what I got was an absolutely perfectly parallel piece of board to that slot. Now what I can do now is take this material and turn it around like that, and now I know that this is absolutely parallel to the miter slot. And now it's a lot easier to tell because I don't have this great big gap and I don't have a great big tall fence to try and look down. And look at how easy that is to see. I'm going to show you a close up here. It is such an easy way to check your fence. There, see how easy that is? You can tell when I move the fence out, you can see that gap pretty readily. Well, that concludes my video for today. There are some ideas on how you can tune up and fix up your table saw so you can get even better results from it. I'm Colin Canet for WoodWorkWeb. Thanks for watching.